Imagine waking up in a hospital bed with no memory of who you are. Just emptiness where your past should be. Now imagine discovering that the homeless man you've been treating as a nurse is actually the long-lost father of one of the richest men in Boston. A father everyone believed was dead for 20 years. This extraordinary story of forgotten identity, unexpected connections, and the collision of three lives will show you that sometimes the most profound second chances come when we lose everything we thought defined us. Before we dive into this emotional journey of rediscovery and healing, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell. This channel brings you powerful stories of human connection every week, and this might be our most moving tale yet. Let's begin. Night had already fallen at St. Anne's Hospital in Boston, as the fluorescent lights of the main corridor dimly illuminated the silhouette of Emily Hayes. At 28, with a gaze that carried more compassion than fatigue, Emily was finishing her third consecutive shift. She tied back her brown hair with a worn elastic band as the speakers announced an emergency at the entrance to the ER. Male, approximately 70 years old, found unconscious on Commonwealth Avenue. No documents, no identification. Vital signs unstable. Emily ran down the corridor, joining the emergency team. When the automatic doors opened, she saw paramedics transferring an elderly man to a hospital gurney. His face was pale, with bruises on his right temple, his simple clothes dirty and torn. Nothing in his pockets, no wallet, no phone, not even a bus ticket that might give some clue about who he was. Possible stroke, elevated blood pressure, mild hypothermia, one of the paramedics informed, passing the preliminary chart. Found by a taxi driver, collapsed between two parked cars. For the following hours, Emily remained by his side while the medical team worked. It wasn't her job to stay there. Her shift had already ended. But something in that wrinkled face kept her present. When the situation stabilized and the man was transferred to a bed in the East Wing, Emily should have gone home. But she didn't. She sat in the chair next to the bed, observing the man. His hands had old calluses. His time-marked face showed deep expression lines. He wore no wedding ring, but there was a lighter mark on his ring finger, suggesting he had once worn one. "Who are you?" Emily murmured, adjusting the IV. "Someone must be looking for you." It was past 3 in the morning when Emily noticed a slight movement. The man's fingers trembled, his eyelids fluttered. She called the nurse on duty, and together they watched as he slowly opened his eyes of a deep blue, still disoriented. "Sir, can you hear me? You're in the hospital." The man moved his dry lips, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. "Where?" was all he managed to articulate. "St. Anne's Hospital. You were found unconscious on the street. Can you tell us your name?" There was a long silence. Panic began to grow in his eyes as he seemed to search his own mind. "Henry," he said finally. I think my name is Henry." "Last name?" asked the other nurse. Confusion took over his face. I can't remember." Emily held his hand, feeling it tremble. "It's okay, Henry. You're safe now." When the nurse on duty left to call the doctor, Emily remained, her fingers intertwined with his. For a brief moment, Henry squeezed her hand back, and a look of absolute vulnerability passed over his face. "Don't leave me," he whispered, his voice choked with a fear Emily didn't fully understand. "I won't leave," she promised, feeling an inexplicable connection with this man without a past. At the end of the corridor, Dr. Richard Thompson, the hospital director, observed the scene through the small window in the door. His calculating gaze moved from the elderly man to Emily as he noted something on his clipboard. He turned and disappeared into the dimness of the corridor, the sound of his firm footsteps echoing like an omen. 3 days had passed since Henry's arrival. Emily, even on her days off, returned to the hospital. There was something in his vulnerability that touched a deep part of her. perhaps because Henry reminded her of her own grandfather, who had died alone in a nursing home while she was in college, a remorse she carried like a stone. Henry gained physical strength each day, but his mind remained a puzzle with missing pieces. He remembered trivial things, that he liked his coffee without sugar, that he was afraid of heights, that at some point he had played piano, but nothing about his identity, family, or what he was doing on that cold Boston street. "We're working with the police to identify you," Emily explained as she helped Henry eat. "Your face has been put into the system, but so far, no one has recognized you." "It's as if I don't exist," Henry responded, his voice firmer than in the first days, but still carrying a disoriented sadness. Emily smiled gently. "You do exist, Henry. You're right here, eating this horrible jello that we pretend is dessert." That drew a weak smile from him, the first Emily had seen. For an instant, his face transformed, and she glimpsed the man he might have been before, someone with dignity, perhaps even charm. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Thompson, followed by two residents. Tall and austere, 45 years old with eyes that seemed to constantly calculate, the hospital director was known for his relentless efficiency and his obsession with financial results. "Good morning," he said coldly, not waiting for a response. "How is our mystery patient today?" Emily stood up, feeling an immediate tension fill the room. "Dr. Thompson, Mr. Henry has shown steady improvement, but—" "Memory," Thompson interrupted, addressing Henry directly, as if Emily weren't there. "Fragments," Henry answered, seeming to shrink under the doctor's incisive gaze. "Sometimes I dream of places, faces, but when I wake up, they disappear." Thompson made quick notes on his electronic clipboard, his eyes never meeting Henry's. "Neurologically, your tests are normal. The stroke was mild and localized. There's no medical justification to keep you hospitalized any longer." "But he has nowhere to go," Emily protested, feeling a wave of indignation. "We don't even know who he is." The director finally looked at her, his cold eyes contrasting with the blush that began to rise up Emily's neck. "Nurse Hayes, can we talk outside?" In the corridor, Dr. Thompson crossed his arms, his voice low but sharp. "This hospital is not a shelter for the homeless. Each bed costs thousands of dollars a day, and there's no insurance, no family, no one to take on these expenses. But he needs care, time to recover his memory. What he needs is social services, not a private room in this hospital." Thompson consulted his expensive wristwatch. "I've already contacted the municipal shelter. They have a spot available tomorrow." "A shelter?" Emily felt a wave of nausea. "Dr. Thompson, you can't just—" "Not only can I, but I must," the doctor cut in. "This hospital operates on tight margins. We can't sustain indefinite charity." Emily took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. "Give me one more week. Just 7 days. If by then we haven't discovered who he is, I myself—" She hesitated, knowing that what she was about to say would change her life. "I myself will take responsibility for him." Thompson tilted his head, studying her with renewed curiosity. "And how exactly do you plan to do that on a nurse's salary? I have a house that's big enough. I can care for him while working with social workers to find a permanent solution." A cold smile touched the director's lips. "Your dedication is admirable, Nurse Hayes. Naive, but admirable." He made a calculated pause. 3 days. That's the maximum I can allow. And you must sign a statement, assuming all responsibility." When Thompson walked away, Emily stood in the corridor, her heart beating hard. What had she just done? Her one-bedroom apartment barely accommodated her and her cat. How would she house an elderly man with special needs? Upon returning to the room, she found Henry looking out the window, an infinite sadness in his demeanor. "I'm a burden to you, aren't I?" he asked, without turning. Emily approached and stood beside him. watching the snow that was beginning to fall over Boston. "You're not a burden, Henry. You're a mystery, and I've always liked mysteries." In the reflection of the window, she saw when a solitary tear ran down his wrinkled face. For a brief moment, something in Henry's posture changed. It became more erect, more dignified, as if for a second he had remembered who he really was. "There's something buried here," he whispered, touching his own temple. "Something important that I can't reach." Emily covered his hand with hers. "We'll find your memories, Henry. I promise." That night, while organizing Henry's medications, Emily noticed something strange on his wrist, an old scar in the shape of a half-moon. When she asked about it, Henry touched it as if it were a talisman. "I don't know how I got this," he said, "but when I touch it, I feel guilt." "Why do I feel guilt, Emily?" The question remained unanswered, echoing in the silent room like a ghost waiting for recognition. If you're touched by Henry and Emily's journey so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We're just getting to the most powerful part of this story, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Plus, your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this one to life. Now, let's continue with our tale. On the morning of the third day, Emily arrived at the hospital earlier, determined to make one last effort to discover Henry's identity. She had brought old newspapers and magazines, hoping something might trigger a dormant memory. She found Henry groomed and freshly shaved, looking stronger, more present. His posture had subtly changed over the last few days. There was still confusion in his eyes, but also flashes of a determination that Emily was beginning to find familiar. "I dreamed of a chessboard last night," he commented, while leafing through one of the magazines Emily had brought. "And a child. A boy who called me." He frowned. "I can't remember what he called me." "Dad? Grandpa?" Emily gently suggested. Henry shook his head. "I don't know, but I felt pride and sadness at the same time." As they talked, Emily noticed other details. The way Henry held his teacup, with his pinky finger slightly raised, the vocabulary he occasionally used, more sophisticated than that of an ordinary person, the way his eyes lingered on architectural details of the room. Small clues to a life that seemed to have been privileged, cultured. "I think you might have been a professor," Emily ventured, "or perhaps someone connected to the arts." Henry smiled sadly. "I'd like to think I was someone useful, at least." The day passed quickly, with Emily showing photos of Boston, maps, anything that might trigger a memory. In the afternoon, they received a visit from a social worker who documented the case and promised, without much enthusiasm, to try to locate records that might help identify him. Shortly after 7 in the evening, as Emily was helping Henry with dinner, the door to the room opened abruptly. Dr. Thompson entered, accompanied by 2 hospital security guards. "Time's up, Nurse Hayes," he announced without preamble. "Mr. Henry has been discharged. Transportation to the shelter is waiting." Emily stood up, placing herself between Thompson and the bed. "You said 3 days. We still have until midnight. Administrative procedures need to be completed before the shift ends," Thompson replied dryly. "Additionally, there's now the matter of the hospital bill. As promised, Nurse Hayes will assume responsibility for the accumulated expenses." He extended a folder with documents. Emily felt her stomach sink when she saw the amount, more than she earned in 6 months. How could she pay that? "This is coercion," she protested, her voice trembling with indignation. "You didn't mention anything about paying for the previous hospitalization. It's clearly provided for in the terms you signed." Thompson smiled coldly. "But I'm willing to discuss a reasonable payment plan, considering your altruism." The tension in the room was palpable. Henry, who had been observing the scene in silence, slowly rose from the bed, his fragile figure gaining an unexpected dignity. "I've caused enough problems," he said with a firmer voice than Emily had ever heard. "I'll go to this shelter. I won't allow this young woman to ruin her life because of me." At that exact moment, the door to the room opened again. A tall man, approximately 45 years old, wearing an impeccably tailored suit, entered followed by two assistants. His angular, tanned face, with intensely blue eyes, showed signs of fatigue and tension. The entire room seemed to freeze. The newcomer swept the environment with a calculated look until his eyes found Henry. For a second, a flash of emotion crossed his impassive face. Shock, recognition, perhaps even fear. Dr. Thompson, clearly recognizing the visitor, immediately changed his posture. "Mr. Blackwood, what a surprise! If we'd known you were coming personally, we would have prepared an appropriate reception. I'm at your disposal to—" But Benjamin Blackwood, one of the wealthiest men on the East Coast, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, philanthropist, and frequent figure in the business pages, completely ignored the director. His eyes remained fixed on Henry, who was staring at him with an expression of growing confusion. Henry took an uncertain step forward, raising his trembling hand toward the man. Something in his face transformed, a memory struggling to emerge from the depths. His lips moved, forming a word no one expected. "Son?" The silence that followed was deafening. Benjamin Blackwood visibly paled, his composure shaken for the first time. One of the assistants murmured something in his ear, but he pushed him away with a brusque gesture. "Impossible," whispered Blackwood, his normally confident voice now choked. "My father is dead. He died almost 20 years ago." Henry touched the crescent-shaped scar on his wrist, and then, in a sudden movement, pointed to the same spot on Benjamin's arm. "You have one just like it. From when we fell from the boat in Nantucket. You were 10 years old." Benjamin instinctively covered his own wrist, where, under his shirt sleeve, everyone now knew there was an identical scar. "How could you know that?" Blackwood's voice was now just a whisper. "Who are you, really?" Henry staggered, overwhelmed by the torrent of memories that suddenly flooded his mind. Emily ran to support him, helping him sit on the bed. "I taught you to play chess," Henry continued, the words coming out in fragments. "You always chose the black pieces. You said that way. I wouldn't see your moves coming." Benjamin Blackwood approached slowly, each step seeming to cost him an immense effort. When he was just inches from Henry, he knelt, his eyes examining every detail of that aged face. "All these years," Benjamin murmured, "I believed you had died in that accident. They found the car, your blood. They said the body had been washed away by the river." Henry raised his hesitant hand, touching the face of the son he hadn't seen in 2 decades. "I ran away, didn't I? I was running from something." The entire room held its breath. Dr. Thompson, previously so arrogant, now seemed diminished, aware that he had tried to evict the father of one of the most powerful and influential men in Boston. "This changes absolutely everything," he muttered, frantically checking the medical records as if looking to correct a fatal error. "Yes, it does," agreed Benjamin Blackwood, rising and facing the hospital director with a look that could freeze hell. "And I believe we have much to discuss about the treatment my father received here, Doctor." Emily, feeling she should give privacy to the unexpected family reunion, began to move away. Surprisingly, it was Henry who held her hand. "Stay," he asked. "Please. You're the only person who cared about me when I was nobody." And so, as night fell over Boston, in a hospital room that hours before was a scene of despair, a family shattered by time began to gather the fragments of a story everyone believed was finished. 3 weeks had passed since the dramatic revelation at St. Anne's Hospital. The city of Boston was facing one of the worst snowstorms of the decade, but inside the Blackwood mansion in Beacon Hill, the atmosphere was surprisingly warm. Henry, now officially identified as Henry Blackwood, occupied a suite on the first floor, adapted for his recovery. As his physical strength returned, so did fragments of memory, some welcome, others too painful to share. Emily remained present in his life, although now under completely different circumstances. Benjamin had insisted on hiring her as a private nurse for his father, offering a salary she had never dreamed of receiving. At first, Emily had hesitated, fearing that the special relationship she had developed with Henry would change when he regained his identity and social position. But the old man remained the same, gentle, reflective, grateful for her presence. That Thursday afternoon, Emily was helping Henry with his physical therapy exercises when Benjamin entered the room, carrying an old wooden box. "I found this in storage," he said, placing the box on the small table. "I thought it might help with your memories." Henry opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside were yellowed photographs, newspaper clippings, small mementos of a life that was gradually reclaiming its place in his consciousness. "Your mother," murmured Henry, touching the photo of an elegant woman with smiling eyes. "Elizabeth." "Yes," confirmed Benjamin, his voice softer than usual. "She missed you until the end." A heavy silence filled the room. Emily realized it was time to withdraw, to give them privacy for this conversation that had long needed to happen. "I'll prepare some tea," she said, heading for the door. "Actually, Emily," Benjamin stopped her, "I'd like you to stay. There are things that, well, things I need to say, and it might be easier with you here." Surprised, Emily nodded and sat back down, noticing how Benjamin seemed different today. Not the imposing magnate who commanded an empire, but a man dealing with old wounds that had never properly healed. "Father," he began, the words still sounding strange on his lips after so many years. "The doctors say your amnesia is diminishing, that your memories are returning, but there are things you may not yet remember, about why you disappeared." Henry frowned, concentrating. "I have flashes, an argument, important papers, something about the company." "The merger with Meridian," completed Benjamin. "You were vehemently opposed. You said there was something wrong with the numbers, that we were being deceived." He paused, choosing his words. "I didn't believe you. I was young, ambitious, wanted to prove my worth. I called you paranoid, outdated." Emily observed the pain in Benjamin's eyes, the guilt that had clearly consumed him for years. "That night," Benjamin continued, "after our fight, you went out to cool off. Your car was found destroyed near Harrison Bridge. There was blood, your documents. The police concluded you had been thrown into the river." "But that's not what happened," said Henry softly, like someone trying to reach a fleeting memory. "There was an accident, yes. I hit my head. But afterward, someone helped me. A truck driver, I think. But I was confused, disoriented. I couldn't remember who I was, just fragments. And there was something, a fear, as if it wasn't safe to return." Benjamin swallowed hard. "You were right about Meridian. 6 months after the merger, we discovered the fraud. We almost lost everything. And I began to suspect that your accident might not have been accidental." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "Are you saying someone tried to—" "I could never prove it," Benjamin cut in. "But I hired investigators for years, looking for any sign that my father might be alive." Henry touched one of the photos, him and young Benjamin on a sailboat. "Why did you stop searching?" Benjamin's face contorted in an expression of contained anguish. "Because I believed I had failed you. Because it was easier to think you were dead than to imagine you were alive somewhere, alone, perhaps injured or without memory, needing me." His voice faltered. "And because, deep down, I knew you were ashamed of me." "Ashamed?" Henry seemed genuinely confused. "Of the man I became, of the compromises I made, of the people I hurt along the way." Benjamin looked out the window at the falling snow. I built an empire, Dad, but I lost something in the process. The silence that followed was broken by the ring of Benjamin's phone. He looked at the screen, and his face closed again into the professional mask he usually wore. I need to take this. Excuse me. When he left the room, Emily saw Henry watching the closed door with an expression of deep sadness. He's so hard on himself, murmured the old man. Always has been since childhood. Never accepted being less than perfect. Emily approached, helping him organize the photos they had spread out. He's changed since you came back. The entire staff comments on it. Henry smiled melancholically. I wish I could remember more. There are still so many holes. He touched his temple, as if parts of me were still lost in that river. We'll give it time, Emily said gently. Each day brings more memories. The following week, a new routine was established in the Blackwood mansion. Emily arrived in the morning and spent the day helping Henry with exercises, medications, and, mainly, stimulating his memories with old photos, music, even foods he used to like. Benjamin, surprisingly, began to reserve his afternoons to be with his father. The effort he made to reconnect, to rebuild a relationship that had been interrupted at its most tense moment, was visible. It was during one of these afternoons that Dr. Thompson appeared at the mansion, requesting a private meeting with Benjamin. Emily, who was serving tea in the study, received an icy look from the hospital director. Mr. Blackwood, Thompson began, clearly nervous, I've come personally to discuss the situation at our hospital. As you know, the incident with your father was deeply regrettable. An error in judgment on my part that— An error? Benjamin raised an eyebrow. They tried to evict my father, as if he were an unwanted homeless person. Threatened Nurse Hayes with an unpayable debt? And you call this an error in judgment? Thompson paled. We're implementing new protocols for unidentified patients. And of course, the generous donation your foundation makes annually to St. Anne's is cancelled, Benjamin finished dryly. In fact, my legal team is reviewing all our commitments to your institution. Emily, embarrassed to witness this uncomfortable conversation, tried to discreetly leave, but Thompson stopped her with a sudden question. Nurse Hayes, I'd like to hear your opinion. What do you think could have been done differently that night? The question caught her off guard. It was the first time Thompson had shown any interest in her opinion. I believe that— She hesitated, carefully choosing her words. Often, we get lost among protocols and spreadsheets, forgetting that we treat people, not numbers. Thompson observed her for an extended moment, something different in his gaze. A perceptive observation. Perhaps we really need to rethink our priorities. When the director finally left, Benjamin turned to Emily with a rare smile. I've never seen Richard Thompson so disconcerted. You have a gift for dismantling arrogant people, Emily. She blushed slightly. I just said what I think. And that's exactly what makes you so exceptional. The comment hung between them, creating a moment of unexpected connection that left Emily strangely disturbed. In the days that followed, she began to notice subtle changes in Benjamin's behavior. He spent more time at the mansion, frequently finding excuses to participate in Henry's therapy sessions. His questions to Emily became more personal, about her family, her dreams, what had led her to nursing. One afternoon, while Henry was resting, Benjamin invited her for tea in the library. Among shelves that went from floor to ceiling, surrounded by first editions of classics that would cost a fortune, he seemed curiously vulnerable. Emily, there's something I've been wanting to ask, he began, serving her tea in Chinese porcelain that probably cost more than her monthly rent. What did you see in my father when he was just an unknown homeless man? What made you fight so hard for someone no one else valued? The question surprised her with its sincerity. I saw a human being who needed help, she answered simply. And also, she hesitated, I saw dignity beneath the confusion. As if, even lost, something fundamental in him remained intact. Benjamin nodded slowly. You saw what I should have looked for all these years. Don't blame yourself, Emily said softly. You believed he had died. Part of me knew the truth, Benjamin confessed. A part I preferred to silence with work, with acquisitions, with power. He looked at her intensely. You remind me a lot of my mother, you know. She also saw beyond appearances. Emily felt a strange warmth rise up her neck. The comparison with the late Elizabeth Blackwood, the woman whose photo occupied a place of honor in that same library, was unexpected and disturbing. Your father talks about her a lot, Emily commented, trying to divert attention from herself. Memories of her seem to be the most vivid. They were married for almost 40 years, Benjamin said with a melancholy smile. A love that survived everything, including my teenage rebellions and the company's crises. The silence that followed had a different quality. It wasn't uncomfortable, but charged with something unspoken. Dr. Thompson called me yesterday, Benjamin said abruptly, changing the subject. He's determined to repair his image with me. He offered to come personally to monitor my father's progress. Emily raised her eyebrows, surprised. I imagine you refused. Actually, I accepted. Benjamin smiled enigmatically. I believe the good doctor needs some lessons in humanity, and who better to teach them than you and my father? 2 days later, Dr. Thompson arrived punctually at 3 in the afternoon. To Emily's surprise, he came without his usual entourage of assistants, wearing casual clothes instead of the traditional lab coat or formal suit. Henry received him on the covered porch, wrapped in thick blankets, while watching the snow beginning to melt in the gardens of the property. The change in Thompson's behavior was visible. There was no longer condescension or coldness, but an almost reverential respect. Mr. Blackwood, it's extraordinary to see your recovery, he commented after preliminary examinations. Your vital force is remarkable. Henry smiled gently. I have good reasons to regain my strength, Doctor. A second chance is not something to be wasted. Benjamin observed the interaction with interest, noting how his father, even fragile, maintained a natural dignity that commanded respect. During the tea that followed, the conversation flowed surprisingly well, with Thompson demonstrating a more human side that Emily had never imagined existed. You know, the doctor commented at one point, I spent so much time managing numbers that I almost forgot why I initially chose medicine. And why did you choose it? Henry asked with genuine interest. Thompson hesitated, as if the question touched something deep. My younger brother had a congenital heart condition. I spent my childhood in hospitals, observing how some doctors treated him as a case, others as a person. He paused. I promised myself I would be of the second type. Emily, serving more tea, looked at Thompson with new eyes. What happened to your brother? He didn't survive adolescence. The doctor's voice faltered slightly. Sometimes I wonder if he would recognize the man I've become. The silence that followed was filled with a mutual understanding that no one expected. Benjamin exchanged a look with Emily. There was something transformative happening there, something that went beyond family reconciliations. In the following weeks, Thompson became a regular visitor at the Blackwood mansion. To everyone's surprise, especially Emily's, he demonstrated a genuine knowledge of literature, art, and classical music that greatly pleased Henry. The two often spent hours discussing Italian operas or debating the merits of different translations of Russian classics. Emily also noticed how Thompson treated her differently, with a respect that bordered on admiration, frequently seeking her opinion on matters related to Henry's recovery. One afternoon, as they walked through the garden now free of snow, he made an unexpected confession. You've changed my perspective, Emily. May I call you that? She nodded, still not entirely comfortable with this new dynamic. Observing your dedication to a patient everyone had discarded, he continued, made me question all the decisions I've made in recent years. the way I transformed the hospital into an efficient financial operation, but perhaps empty. It's never too late to change direction, Emily responded gently. That's what I've been discovering. Thompson smiled, a gesture that illuminated his face in a way that made him almost unrecognizable. I'm implementing new protocols at the hospital. One of them bears your name, Hayes Protocol, for vulnerable patients without identification. Emily stopped, genuinely surprised. Are you serious? Absolutely. There was an unprecedented sincerity in his eyes. And I'd like you to participate in the committee that will develop the specific guidelines. Meanwhile, in the mansion's library, Benjamin and Henry were engaged in their own transformative conversation. The first chess match they had played in 20 years. You always chose the black pieces, Henry commented, moving a pawn. I said that way you wouldn't see my moves coming, Benjamin completed with a nostalgic smile. Which was, of course, a childish fantasy. You always knew exactly what I was planning. Not always, Henry corrected gently. You surprised me many times throughout life. Benjamin studied the board, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. I've been thinking about reducing my workload, he said abruptly. Maybe passing the executive presidency to someone younger. Just keeping the board. Henry raised his eyebrows. A significant decision. What motivated this? You, Benjamin answered simply. Seeing how I almost lost the chance to know you again made me realize how much time I've wasted chasing things that don't really matter. That night, when everyone had retired, Emily found Benjamin on the porch, contemplating the starry sky with a glass of whiskey in his hands. Can't sleep? She asked, wrapping herself more firmly in her coat against the cold of the nascent spring. Too many thoughts, he answered, offering her a place beside him. And you? The same. She accepted the invitation, sitting in the neighboring chair. Your father is progressing wonderfully. Soon, he won't need me anymore. Benjamin observed her for a long moment. Emily, you know you've become much more than a nurse to this family, don't you? She lowered her eyes, suddenly aware of the intensity of his gaze. Your father is special to me. Only my father? The question hung between them, loaded with unexplored possibilities. Before Emily could answer, the porch door opened again. To the surprise of both, it was Thompson, who apparently also suffered from insomnia. Sorry for the intrusion, he said, clearly embarrassed. I thought I was alone out here. Join us, Richard, Benjamin invited, with a cordiality that weeks before would have been unthinkable. We're just contemplating the stars and the twists of life. Thompson hesitated before accepting, taking the third available seat. For a moment, the three remained in silence, observing the night sky of Boston, each lost in their own thoughts. You know what's fascinating? Thompson finally commented. How a single event can completely change the course of multiple lives. Like Henry's return, Benjamin agreed. Like Emily's compassion, added Thompson, looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. A mixture of admiration and something deeper. Emily felt the weight of both men's gazes, each communicating something different, each representing a possible path her life could take from that moment. Inside the house, without their knowledge, Henry observed the scene from his bedroom window. A serene smile touched his lips as he contemplated those three people whose lives had become intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. The next day, during breakfast, Henry announced he would like to go for an outing. His first real outing since he had recovered part of his identity. The small expedition quickly transformed into an event. Benjamin canceled all his meetings. Emily carefully prepared the necessary medications, and, to everyone's surprise, Thompson offered his car, a perfectly restored classic convertible. It was my brother's dream, he explained when they noticed his nostalgic expression as he handed the keys to Benjamin. I bought it when I became director and restored it in his memory. The place chosen by Henry was the Boston Botanical Garden, where, according to newly recovered memories, he used to take his wife every Sunday. As they walked among the first flowers of spring, a subtle transformation occurred. The formal barriers that separated those four people, patient and caregivers, employer and employees, doctor and nurse, began to dissolve, revealing simply four human beings connected by extraordinary circumstances. Emily observed Thompson helping Henry identify some rare plants, noting how the hospital director, previously so cold and calculating, now demonstrated genuine patience and kindness. Even more surprising was seeing how his eyes frequently sought hers, as if seeking her approval or simply wishing to share a moment of joy. Benjamin, in turn, walked a few steps behind, his face revealing a complex mixture of emotions as he watched his father rediscover a pleasure that had been an important part of his previous life. "He seems so at peace," Emily commented when Benjamin approached. "It's more than he deserves after all he's been through," he responded, his gaze lingering on her face. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you." She felt her heart inexplicably accelerate. "Yes? These last months, seeing you care for my father, seeing how you transformed not just his life, but mine too." Benjamin hesitated, something rare for a man normally so confident. "I realize I've developed feelings for you that go beyond gratitude or professional admiration." Emily felt her face warm. "Benjamin, You don't need to answer now," he gently interrupted. "I know it's unexpected, perhaps even inappropriate considering how we met. But I didn't want to let this opportunity pass without at least expressing what I feel." Before Emily could formulate a response, they were interrupted by Henry, who was enthusiastically waving from a small Japanese pavilion. "Come see! Richard found the cherry trees that Elizabeth loved so much." During the rest of the outing, Emily found herself divided between Benjamin's confession and the growing perception that Richard Thompson was looking at her in a way that communicated similar feelings. The director, always so formal and distant, now seemed transformed, more accessible, more human, almost vulnerable in his evident admiration for her. On the trip back to the mansion, a comfortable silence filled the car. Henry had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted but visibly happy. Thompson drove carefully, occasionally exchanging glances with Emily through the rearview mirror. "It was a perfect day," he commented when they stopped at a traffic light. "The kind of day that makes you reconsider your priorities." "How so?" Benjamin asked from the back seat. Thompson smiled slightly. "I spent years pursuing professional recognition, efficiency, measurable results. And today, just watching Henry identify flowers, I felt more satisfaction than closing the biggest deal at the hospital." Emily nodded, understanding perfectly. "Sometimes we find purpose where we least expect it, and people who transform us when we least anticipate," added Thompson, his gaze meeting hers through the rear-view mirror for a significant moment. That night, in her small apartment, away from the opulence of the Blackwood mansion, Emily found herself at a crossroads she had never imagined. On one side, Benjamin Blackwood, powerful, complex, carrying the weight of a past he was only beginning to reconcile. On the other, Richard Thompson, a man in full transformation, rediscovering his own humanity, looking at her as if she represented everything he had lost along the way. And at the center of this unlikely equation was Henry, the man without memory who had united them all, whose journey of rediscovery continued to transform every life it touched. The next morning, upon returning to the mansion, Emily found Henry in the garden, feeding birds with seeds that Thompson had brought especially for him. "Good morning, dear," he greeted her with an affectionate smile. "Come sit with me. There's something I'd like to tell you." Emily obeyed, accepting the cup of tea he offered her. "I noticed some interesting things yesterday," Henry began with a mischievous gleam in his eyes, "particularly about how certain gazes crossed during our outing." Emily felt her face blush. "Henry, my memory may be fragmented," he continued gently, but I still recognize when I see the beginning of something significant." He covered her hand with his. "Benjamin has changed since you entered our lives. He's become the man I always knew he could be." "Your son is a remarkable man," Emily responded carefully. "Yes, he is." Henry paused. "As is Richard Thompson becoming another man whose transformation I've witnessed with interest." Emily didn't know how to respond. Henry smiled understandingly. "I'm not trying to embarrass you, dear. I just want you to know that whatever path your heart chooses, you have my complete blessing." Deet. At that moment, as if summoned by an invisible force, Benjamin and Thompson appeared in the garden, coming from opposite directions. Both stopped upon seeing Emily and Henry in intimate conversation. "Ah, excellent timing," Henry commented cheerfully. "We were just talking about new beginnings." Emily observed the two men approach, each representing a possible future, each bringing their own version of promise and complexity. "New beginnings," Thompson repeated thoughtfully. "Seems appropriate, considering everything that's happened in the last few months. And considering what's yet to come," added Benjamin, his gaze meeting Emily's. Henry observed the scene with the serenity of someone who, having lost and recovered everything, understood the true value of human connections. "You know," he finally said, "losing my memory was terrifying, but it was also liberating. It allowed me to see people without the weight of past stories, of accumulated expectations." He smiled at each of them. "Perhaps we all occasionally need the opportunity to be truly seen, as if for the first time." As the morning sun bathed the garden of the Blackwood mansion, those four people remained in contemplative silence, united by a journey that had begun with a man without identity in a hospital bed, and now unfolded into possibilities that none of them could have predicted. For Emily, the future remained uncertain, divided between two men who represented completely different paths. For Thompson, it was the beginning of a personal and professional reinvention that was already transforming the hospital he directed. For Benjamin, it meant reconciling not just with his recovered father, but with the man he had become in his absence. And for Henry Blackwood, who had lived two lives in a single existence, it was simply confirmation that even the most unlikely journeys can lead to destinations of profound meaning and connection. The mystery that had begun on a cold winter night, with a nameless man and a compassionate nurse, would continue to unfold in new chapters, each revealing, in its own time, that the most precious memories are not those we recover from the past, but those we create together in the present. This story reminds us that identity isn't just about who we were, but who we choose to become each day. Sometimes, losing everything we thought defined us creates space for genuine connection and transformation. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need a reminder that second chances can appear when we least expect them, and that compassion can change not just one life, but many.